Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Today is Monday, May 23rd, the 22nd of Iyar. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. At this moment, we are studying Masechah Shabbos, chapter 16, page Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, turning to Amud Beis. That's 117a, soon to be 117b. We're going to continue yesterday's discussion first about what to do if you have a broken barrel leaking wine. When and how may you save that wine, and when and how is one prohibited from saving the wine? As you may recall, at the end of last week's session, we discussed on Friday a question about if livestock fall into a pit, a mother and child, can they be saved? Why is there a question? Because the only heter to save an animal on Yontif from a pit, which is otherwise muktzah, is because you're going to shecht it. But you're not allowed to shecht a mother and a child, an animal, in the same day. You're not allowed to slaughter an animal, mother and child, on the same day. And so only one of those animals are available for shchita. Only one of those animals are available to be produced into fresh meat in honor of Yontif, and therefore there's a machlokes if one can save them or not. That's going to be an analogy to our case of harama, of employing a trick to allow or to create the opportunity to save the maximum amount of wine. What is the trick? Well, the trick is, if you have a leaking barrel, you might call all your neighbors and say, hey guys, be my guests. Come, grab a cup, fill up with wine, and then afterwards they'll return the wine and you will have saved the wine. That would be harama. So anyways, that's going to be our first discussion. With Hashem's help, we'll get into a very important discussion about how to do the motzi, how to make hamoitzi on Shabbos, how many challahs, how to cut them. And of course, it's something that we do on an ongoing basis every Shabbos. And so it's interesting to see the Talmud's take, and we'll see how it influences halacha, lemaisa, how we do the B'tzia Sapas, how we make hamoitzi on Shabbos. So, again, welcome, dear friends. We'll dedicate today's learning for good news for all of Klal Yisrael. And I want to mention a name that we were asked to daven for Chaya Bas Ita, for Refuah Shlema. So let's share the screen. Let's get started, and welcome on board. Here we go. Here's the screen. We'll start just a few lines above where we ended off yesterday. I gave a recap. Now we'll see inside Gufa. We just quoted a brayso that talks about a broken barrel of wine on Shabbos and how to save and how much can be saved on Shabbos. Why is there a restriction to how much you can save? Because we're afraid, as you may recall, that a person is going to bring barrels, dishes, bowls from outside of the Rosh Hashanah. Person has a barrel on his roof and it splits, it cracks, and now wine is dripping out, a precious commodity. How and can you save it on Shabbos? So here's what you do. Maybe kli, bring a vessel, and place it to capture the dripping wine. But you cannot bring more than one vessel to catch the wine. For another vessel to continue collecting. What if a person has guests? So are you restricted to the one keli rule? Answer is no. Maybe keli achar v'keli. Then you can bring a second dish to receive wine to accommodate your guests as well. Or kli achar mitzar, if you could put another vessel next to it. But you shouldn't place a second dish and only then invite guests to justify the second dish being brought there. First, you have to have the guests, and then if you have actual guests, you can collect the wine. First, invite guests as your barrel is leaking out, and then you can bring a second vessel. So here's what I would suggest you do. Put your first vessel, put your first pot, invite the guests, and then you can bring your second. Rashi, Orchim, when you're first collecting the initial thing, you wouldn't need to have guests, but nonetheless, you shouldn't do so. The ein marim mekach, you shouldn't do a trick to invite guests who are actually not going to join you. So what happens is you invite guests and say, yeah, we're going to come. You put another vessel to catch more wine to serve them, and then they all scatter into the night. But meanwhile, you've saved more wine. Rabbi Yehuda says, you know what? You're even allowed to make this trick. You're allowed to say, oh yeah, guests are coming, and actually have guests come. But in the end, if they don't show up, you'll have saved yourself additional wine. Wine, of course, being a very precious, valuable commodity and a costly thing to lose. All right, let's see the rest of the Gemara. Lema, what's the machlokes? Why does Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda say you could do the trick, invite guests, and then you won't actually have them over, and you'll have saved the wine? And why does the first opinion say you cannot? Maybe they are aligned with another machlokes, which is very thought-provoking, which we started discussing on Friday, and we'll continue now. Lema, look to the Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua Kamifligi. Maybe these two opinions in the Brisa are aligned with a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in the question of ha'arama of using a trick of sorts. What's their debate? Tanya, a mother, cattle, and child that fall into a pit. Anyantif. And again, as we mentioned, they cannot be both shechted b'yom echad. You can't slaughter a mother and child animal the same day. It's a biblical commandment. So what do? Are you allowed to save them both from the pit? Rabbi Eliezer says, "My lesser rishon, almanas l'shoichte." What you do is you take out the first one and say, "Yeah, I'm going to shecht it." The hasheni. What about the second animal? Don't take it out. You'll cast down food. You'll make sure to preserve the animal's life without bringing it out of the pit. You can't touch it. It's muksa. So you preserve its life, but you cannot carry it out. Being that you can't shecht it, it has no justification to be handled. It is therefore muksa. And so what you should do is preserve its life. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua disagrees. He says, no. When you come to the pit and you want to save one animal, say, yes, I want to save that animal and schlep it out of the pit. But don't shecht it. And then Marim make a trick. The word trick is probably not the best word. Let's see. Artifice. I've never used that in my conversational language. Clever or cunning device or expedience, especially as used to trick or deceive others. So here you're not actually deceiving or tricking anyone. Hashem isn't tricked. Society isn't tricked. But you're able to employ a legal loophole, even though in your heart of hearts, you know from the outset that you're going to be using this artifice. What is the trick? Malas Hasheni, take out the second animal. What you do is you say, you know what? I took out this animal, but the other animal we forgot to take out. It's better tasting. It's more fresh. It's more desirable. It has more meat on it. And so although the person knew from the outset, so long as you're following the baseline core laws of Muksa, Rabbi Yehoshua is inclined to permit it.
Rabbi?
Yes.
The second animal is a muktzah. Why is what makes it a muktzah? I thought that in general animals on Shabbos can be handled. You can feed them, you can give them water, you can move them from one place to another. You cannot work them, but nevertheless. It didn't seem like it was a muktzah.
So it's not entirely simple.
Now when it is in the pit, it's all of a sudden a muktzah.
It's not entirely simple to say that animals are or are not muktzah. Mm-hmm. If you recall, we had a discussion about your own pets. You're certainly allowed to feed or care for animals. But animals that are beef, that are raised for beef, and the only reason why you'd really be handling it is because you're going to be bringing it to the slaughterhouse as graphic, if you will, or uncomfortable as this may be for us. So then, short of using it, it would be muktzah. A pet was another question of how and when and if to care for it. You're allowed to, if you recall, we even discussed about livestock. You're allowed to lead it to graze or to survive, saying to provide for it, but otherwise you're not simply allowed to handle livestock. And and other here, the only reason to be taken out of the pit is because you're going to shecht it. Otherwise, you would have no motivation to be involved in this livestock.
Like to take it to graze, to pull it out, not to shecht it, but to preserve its life by putting it to graze.
So you're allowed to feed it, but the animal is not in jeopardy of dying. And we'll discuss, not now, we'll discuss. It's possible that if it's truly muktzah, you might have to let it die. But here, there's an easy and simple solution. You could feed it. It's not pleasant. The animal doesn't love it, but the animal will survive the next 12 or 15 hours, so long as it's fed and cared for. And so therefore, it doesn't seem that there's a license here to otherwise remove it. Let me see if I can give you any additional... No, my book is missing. Bear with me a second. See if we can fill in the subject a little more. All right, I don't have anything more for you at this moment. I'll see if I can come across any additional scholarship or discussions. The primary discussion about this matter of muktzah and yontif is in Masechet Beitza or Beya, which we will study in due course. Actually, hold on, give me one more second. Let's do this. So just for your comfort, in halacha and shulchan aruch, oisev es benoi, shenaflu lebar malos arishan amanas l'sheichtoi. So the halacha lemaisa, the shulchan aruch paskins, according to the viewpoint that you were allowed to save the animal. Oh, I'm sorry. I should really elaborate a little further. I'm sorry. It's possible that on Yontif, other animals would really not be muktzah, even if you don't actually intend to shecht it. Because, and here's what I failed to explain. Other animals have the potential to be shechted. So forget Shabbos for a moment. On Yontif, even if you don't shecht it, it's accessible, it's available, there is the potential. And so therefore, it's possible that other animals are muktzah. There is a unique problem with a mother and child animal in that you are absolutely prohibited from shechting the mother animal if you shechted the child or vice versa. The biblical prohibition. So whereas on Yontif, maybe other animals, again, not going into Shabbos, they may actually not be muktzah, even if you don't actually shecht it. A mother and a child is a much greater problem. And therefore, the only question of this matter is, a mother and a child. There is no such discussion on Yontif about other animals, certainly kosher animals.
Rabbi, it works the other way around. An animal that you have for shechting, you could change your mind and keep it for another reason.
Correct. That's what we're saying. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to handle an animal you're allowed to handle an animal that even if you don't end up shechting it. And that's why Rabbi Yoshua says, you know what, take one animal out under the pretext that you're going to shecht it, and then say, I changed my mind. And because you didn't shecht that animal, the other animal is yet available for shechita. And so you can say, I'd actually prefer this one. Anyways, let's see the Gemara. Let's see the Gemara's analysis. It'll give us some additional perspective. So anyways, that's the machlokes. And we want to say that there is an alignment between the debate between Rabbi Eliezer, who says you cannot save the second animal if you've declared your intention to shech the first animal. The second animal is already off limits. You provide for it to keep it from dying, but you cannot carry it out. Mishua says, no, you can employ trickery. Mimai, the Gemara says, and the same thing with a barrel of wine. Wine is dripping out. There are halachic restrictions that you're not allowed to carry more than one barrel. But so long as it is technically within the framework provided by Chazal. Namely, Chazal said, don't bring multiple dish vessels to capture the wine, unless you have guests, and then you can. So invite guests, and if you know that they're not going to end up showing up, you've provided for the chazal, you provided a trick which allows you to save more of your stuff, and this would be consistent perhaps with the teaching of Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara says, I don't know if they're not perfectly aligned. There's this important distinction. Dilma'at kan like come Rabbi Lazar Hassam. Maybe. Why is Rabbi Lazar inclined to be strict? The efshar biparnas. The animal may not be supremely comfortable, but it can survive while you feeding it in the pit. And therefore, he says, I'm not going to give you a license to play some kind of shtick. That's probably the most accurate translation of the word harama, shtick. Some kind of game, because the animal will survive otherwise. Maybe, but maybe when it comes to wine, you can't wait till after Shabbos. The barrel is dripping and dripping, and it'll be empty. So maybe there he'll be inclined to be more lenient and allow you to actually invite guests. Or, alternatively, Adkan like Rabbi Yeshua Hasa, maybe the reason why Rabbi Yeshua by animals is inclined to be incredibly lenient to allow you to take out both animals. Mishum Rebera, look carefully. The Ikot Sar Bali Chayim. There's an additional component here. The animal will survive, but he certainly isn't comfortable. But with a barrel of wine, there is no Tsar Bali Chayim. So there is no additional factor. It's only your assets. It's only your resources. When you add you both to save your resources, but also essentially the question of Tsar Bali Chayim, maybe that's where Rabbi Yeshua is inclined to be more lenient. But otherwise, he would not provide a waiver to save the item. All right. Let us see a little further. Okay, so this really concludes our present discussion about this harama, this trickery, and saving an animal, mother and child on Yontif, if it is muksa or isn't muksa. The Gemara is then going to resume a discussion about different other scenarios where something is needed. So are we going to allow you to brush, to live on the edge, and are we going to give a waiver that otherwise, to do something that otherwise would not be permitted on Shabbos in order to salvage necessary food? Just want to take a peek at the Rambam, see if he references this discussion. Let's read the Rambam. So we'll have an additional sense of this Gemara, the way the Rambam paskins, with probably slight variation from the way the Shulchan Aruch does. B'char shenoilad, umuma imai. This is in the laws of Yontif. Umuma imai hareza muchan ve'mevak ma'asu Yontif. An animal that's born with a mum, you can eat it. It's not. Ideally, you should not inspect it to see if it's permitted to be shechted Yontif. But if the animal was found to be acceptable for shechita, and it didn't have to be a carbon, or it wasn't subject to the laws of a bechor, which are beyond the scope of our discussion, so you can eat it. That's not our Gemara. What happens if a bechor falls into a pit? Such an animal you have to feed in the pit. So the Rambam here establishes, based on the Gemara in Bay, I believe, that if the animal is absolutely off limits on Yontif, you cannot shecht it. Well, then it is muksa. You're not able to handle the animal. You can feed it, but you can't carry it. That's also not our discussion. Now we'll see how the Rambam paskins in our discussion. And again, there's going to be ample time to really review this in the Gemara in Beah, which is the primary tractate that deals with laws of Yontif, Malach on Yontif, preparing food on Yontif, etc. Muksa. The Torah says, let's take a look at the pasuk finally. I think you should see this screen. Shor oiseh, ox, sheep, oiseh v'asbenoi, lo yishchatu b'yom echad. You cannot slaughter the mother and child on the same day. No animal from the herd or from the flock shall be slaughtered on the same day with its young. This is halacha, something we practice till this day. Rashi, of course, points out that's only the mother and the child, not the father. All right, let's go back to the Gemara, to the Rambam. What happens if the mother and child fall in a pit? Take out the first one and say, yeah, we're going to shech this one. But then you don't shecht it. And you can do this harama, this trick, this shtick. Take out the second one, and now either one can be slaughtered. But Rebbe, take a look. Mishum tsar bali chayim, hitiru laharim. Because of the factor of tsar bali chayim, we allow that which would otherwise not be permitted. The interesting thing with the Rambam here is he doesn't even quote the other factor. He goes straight to the point and says tsar bali chayim tips the scale in favor of saving the animal. What I get from this, by the way, is I suspect the Gemara does not have a supremely positive view on putting an animal into a cage, because that's not nice to the animal. That's pretty mean. Anyways, back to our Gemara. Now we're going to talk about other types of saving. Taner Rabbanan. Kitzel pas nakiya. Ein matzel pas hadra. All right, we're going to see now a discussion, but the Gemara is actually going to confuse us in a sense. The Gemara is going to first tell us a sub conversation, and then the Gemara is going to take us to the premise. So I'm going to read it really fast without explaining. We're going to see the next paragraph, and then this Gemara will make more sense. Hitzul pas nakiya, if a person left their bread in the oven, and generally, you're not supposed to do horada. You're not supposed to take bread out of the oven on Shabbos. Even though the removal of the bread on Shabbos is not an act of baking, it's just salvaging, it's just getting it. But if you already rescued good bread, fine bread, well sifted, high grade bread, you're not allowed to then go on and also save a more basic, undesirable coarse bread. Today, coarse bread is considered a specialty item and it's considered more healthy. That was not the perspective in the time of the Talmud. Pas hadra, but if you save this more coarse bread, matzel pas nakiya, you can go on and save higher grade, better bread for yourself. Matzilim miyom kippurim l'Shabbos, you can take bread off you can salvage bread. And we'll see the explanation in a moment. On Yom Kippur, that's going into Shabbos. Avalei Shabbos Yom Kippur, but you cannot take this bread off on Shabbos to provide for Yom Kippur. You're certainly not allowed to remove the bread in the service of Yantif. Shabbos l'Shabbos abanor is one permitted to salvage bread if the intention is going to be to have it available for the next week. Hold on. Taner Rabbanan. Here's the teaching. Shachach pas b'tanor. The kiddush alo hayom. A person puts bread in the oven. He totally forgets about it. He makes kiddush. Shabbos has begun. And now the bread, which more than ever, or I should say then, even more than now, bread was the essential item upon which humans subsisted. So it's going to be a hungry Shabbos. Matzilin mazon shalosh sudos. So one is permitted to salvage bread for 3 meals, similar to the fire, similar to the barrel of wine. And so we see here there's a general willingness by Chazal to waive rabbinic prohibitions in order to access food for Shabbos. When a person has salvaged, or if the person has salvaged all he is going to need, he's allowed to invite other people and say, this bread that I left in the oven, I can't have it. But if you'd like to save it so it doesn't just get burnt or it doesn't just go to the waste, you can have it. When the person is removing the bread. The word roida is this description, a special Hebrew word for the removal of bread from the oven. Dr. Stamler, in modern Hebrew, do you use the word rodeh or ridiatapat? Or is that more a Mishnah?
Not usually, but it's a known word. I mean, people who speak more literary Hebrew we'll use all day.
All right, so a high,
Both
whatever the word
Deutsch.
is. But the average person doesn't talk about lirdot et afat. All right, but in the Mishnah Hebrew, there's this word, especially in the laws of Shabbos, there's precision obviously in this word, and it's used in the halachic discussion. So when he is extracting, removing the bread, well, doctor, I'll tell you another reason why you don't use that word in modern Hebrew, because the manner that the average person makes bread today is on the ground, and so all you do is you pick it up. Ridia, I believe, describes the removal of bread in I think like a Bukharian style, or maybe how do you call it?
Not necessarily. You used to have the ovens. I used to see them on wooden boards, taking out the bread.
And so they would attach the bread to the wall of the oven.
No. I'm talking about regular breads. That's the Bukhari.
So that was the ancient method.
The ancient method. But I'm talking about an oven, like you see the pizzas today. You put them in the oven, and then you take them out with a wooden board. And
right.
That's what I used to see when they used to go into a bakery in Israel to buy bread. Originally, it wasn't mass produced. So you would go into local bakeries and buy bread for the day. And they would take them out of the, but they also don't use the word today because there's the word lotzi, to take out, which is
right.
a more usual word.
So there is a name for this kind of bread baking. Different word, tam. There's with a T something. But anyways, here you see it's this kind of oven, and this is a Bukharian type of bread. And the way they make it is they smack the dough onto the wall. It sticks there. And then at a certain point, they take it down. And I believe it's not precisely like this, but it's this idea where the bread was attached to the wall, whatever, smacked onto the wall of the oven. And so ridiyah meant the removal of the bread, but in this kind of manner. So when he saved the bread for 3 meals, he can invite others to do the same. V'lo yurdeh b'mardeh, he shouldn't use the special tool that was used for doing that. Ella b'sakin, he should use a knife. Rashi, kli sherodin bo et hapat, umafridin oto mikotel hatanor shenidbak ba. There was a special tool that was used to unstick the bread from the wall. V'lo yurdeh oto b'merdeh shuder chol, he shouldn't do it in the manner that it is done in the weekday. Use a knife, which would probably be a little less artful, and maybe some of the dough be stuck on the wall, but that was how to do it. The Gemara is going to challenge this and say, is it true that you're not allowed to use to do ridiyah? Is it so? But Tana de Rabbi Shmuel is a teaching from the school of Rabbi Shmuel. Torah says, Lo taseh kol melacha, don't do any work. This statement that says don't do work provides an exception, or indicates an exception. Yatsa kiyat shofar, this is excludes the blast of the shofar, or the yasapas, and the extraction, the removal of bread from the oven. Shehi chachma ve'eina malacha. It's not biblically prohibited at the very least. It's not prohibited because it is not a malacha. There's a difference between malacha, which is labor, and an expert technique, ve'eina malacha. So the Gemara answers, you're right, it is not biblically prohibited. However, kama de'efshar l'shanoye mishaninan. In this circumstance, although it is not it's not prohibited, when employing a waiver where one otherwise is not allowed to remove bread, but in an urgent case, one does, they should do it in the most non-typical or atypical manner as possible. Hold on one second. Is the waiver to remove bread even if you have food, or only if you don't have food? Most likely, it's only when you literally don't have food. Others, however, say that it's even if you have food, you can still save additional bread. The Ran points out that from the wording of our Gemara, it is evident that even the Chachamim did not prohibit Ridia. You know why? Because biblically, there's no problem as we see. And Lamaisa, it doesn't seem like there was any Ridia in the Mishkan to be prohibited. Tosfos disagree. Let's see Tosfos. It's actually Tosfos is debating. There's different girsaot, different versions of this segment of the Brisa that use different psukim, and some of the versions employ a pasuk that talks about Yantif, which doesn't make sense. The Rash mefarish la'olam mikol meleches avoda im at tkiya v'ridia v'shab tkiya v'ridia. The Rashba says that we actually do use the verse from Yantif, but Shabbos yalfinu Yantif the ein ben Yantif l'Shabbos l'oichel nefesh b'lvad. So basically, because the Torah says meleches avoda leisasu, that's how we understand that if it's a labor, it can't be done. But if it is a chachma, it is permissible. I'm looking for more language about the distinction between chachma and melacha. Anyone have anything they want to share on this matter?
I would say chachma is by someone who's more a specialist in the trade.
So I think melacha, chachma I would probably call a technique, and melacha is a creative labor as we define it. So creative labor, most melachas we say you're actually changing something. Whereas by ridia, although it is a technique of how to artfully remove it, it has no role in the actual change or effect in the baking process. Question: why is there any restriction with the removal of bread? If it's not prohibited even with the Rabbanan, what concern is there? By the fire, we were afraid you're going to put out the fire. By the barrel, we were afraid you're going to bring dishes from elsewhere. Here, what is the restriction? What is the concern?
Is there an issue of borer? You would take out the good.
So I think the answer ultimately is that actually the Chachamim kind of do prohibit ridia. The Chachamim who prohibit removing bread gave a waiver here. Why did they prohibit it? Probably because it's too closely related to the baking process. And if we're going to allow people to remove bread from the oven on Shabbos, they'll come to start baking the bread right before Shabbos and have it actually cook on Shabbos.
Also, the whole thing of the tool, picking up the tool, getting the tool, taking it off the wall, off the bottom.
Others say that maybe he's removing the bread that's not fully baked, and so he's going to end up manipulating the bread in a manner that's akin to kneading, although that doesn't sound like a so the consensus appears to be.
He would take out. I'll go back to my original. Some breads would be more well done than the others, so some need to be cooked longer. So then you do borer and you take out the ones that are ready and you leave the ones that need to be cooked further, you leave them in. So you have borer.
You could even go further. You could take it out and see it's not baked enough and put it back.
So let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch, and then we will move on to a very interesting topic if we have time. If not, we'll continue. Yeah, we'll have time. Shulchan Aruch, Reish Nun Daled, 254. Ein noistim samach lechashecha pas betanor, ela kadei sheyikrumu, unless there's ample time that it'll become entirely crusted and ready and fully cooked. Ela kadei sheyikrumu panav hamudbakim betanor v'lecharara agab gecholim, ela kadei sheyikrumu panav shegnagadesh. You cannot put bread on the fire Erev Shabbos unless there's ample time for it to be properly cooked, which is described with these different descriptions that it has a proper crusting. This is actually discussed earlier on in our Gemara. How do you know if the bread is developed and baked? So he says when you cut a slice and it is not doughy or stringy, that means that it's properly crusted and baked. When it comes to bread, we talk about only one side. Other kinds of dishes, it actually has to be cooked on both sides. This is the comments of their mouth. If they were placed in the oven, very close to Shabbos, and they did not become amply cooked or baked, I should say, if this was done intentionally, so this bread is off limits. You cannot enjoy it. You cannot use it until the amount of time that it would take to bake it after Shabbos. If it was done unintentionally, if he doesn't have enough food, and it wasn't done intentionally, or I suppose alternatively, he left it in the oven and didn't take it out, he can save the amount that would be 3 meals for him. And he can invite other folks that are hungry and tell them, take food that is 3 meals worth. Don't use the special tool that's used to remove the bread, as we read in our Gemara. Use an alternate tool like a knife. But if he is unable to use a knife or whatever, then he can use the regular tool. And I suppose this is learned out of our Gemara. If you recall, the Gemara says, Kama de Efshar lishanoye mishanin. Anyone want to remind me what that means? Kama de Efshar? As much as you are able to do it with a distinction, do it in a different manner. But if you cannot do it in a different manner, well, then we're going to still allow you to save the bread from the fire. If he placed it in the fire with ample time that it'll be properly cooked, he didn't do anything wrong in putting it in the oven, and he needs it. I'm sorry, I scratched that. So he didn't do anything wrong. So for what he needs for Shabbos, he can remove as he does. If he doesn't need it for Shabbos, he cannot take the bread out even in a shinoi. So the shinoi is really not as essential as one might think. When a person is allowed to remove the bread from the oven, well, use a shinoi if you can. When a person is not allowed to remove bread from the oven, a shinoi won't help. Ramah says, all right, let's keep that because it's a different topic. Hang on one second. long story short is in those days, the ovens there was no flame. But if there's a flame, it's a whole lot more complicated. In those days, they'd light up the fire. I think they'd put the fire out, and then they would put their dough in and it would bake. But in the event where there's going to be a flame or a fire, that's a whole lot more complicated. If the fire is out and there's no concern of manipulating the fire, so then, hold on, where's the Shulchan Aruch? Bear with me a moment. What happens if the bread was actually placed? Again, we learned this in the Gemara earlier, but for the fullness of our discussion, I'm reading it now. I don't remember learning it then with you. If you place the dough in the oven on Shabbos, even if it was intentionally, a person is allowed to pull the bread out of the oven. Because if the person doesn't, he's going to be in trouble in a much greater way with skila. There's a whole discussion. I don't know if you remember, Taisus asks, can somebody else pull the dough out of the oven? Let's say you, God forbid, one places dough in the oven on Shabbos. That is a biblically prohibited act of baking. Can somebody else, to help the person avoid having baked on Shabbos, pull the dough off the oven? And so if you look over here, the Berhetiv, many others, but others are not permitted to remove the dough from the fire. Now, here's what I want to show you. The kind of ovens that Dr. Stamler saw growing up, and we saw till this day. Where the dough does not need to be detached. It's just sitting on a rack. One is allowed to take off more than 3 meals worth. But don't use that regular tool that Dr. Stamler mentioned. What do you call that thingy?
It's called a mardeh, but
probably it's called a mardeh, but it's more poetic than the real mardeh.
Actually, I can look it up in the dictionary.
Well, anyways, the point is, don't use that technique. So as long as you're doing a shinoi and it's not actually attached to the oven, and we're not concerned about messing with the coals or the fire, then you can remove it even on Shabbos. All right, that concludes a brief micro session on the baking of bread and the removal of bread, which is interesting and important. But we're about to get to a segment that's even more, I think, interesting. Hang on just one more second. Yeah. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda taught something very important. La'olam yashkim adam laitzas Shabbos. A person should get up early. Rashi be'erev Shabbos. L'troyach u'lizamen haitzais Shabbos. A person should wake up early to begin preparing for Shabbos. Shenemar, where is there support biblically for this idea? Shenemar v'hoya b'yom hashishi v'echino es asher yaviu l'Torah, in describing the mon, I believe, says that on the 6th day, it says that the mon will fall every day, except on Shabbos. And on Erev Shabbos, they should collect 2 portions. The wording in the description of the mon is very much celebrated and frequently analyzed and referenced as a source for a number of halachot, a number of laws and ideas about preparing for Shabbos, including that a person should get up early in preparation for Shabbos. Le'alter, right away. V'chinu es asher yaviu le'alter. B'shas haba hachana v'haba b'ashkama v'dechsi v'yilkadu oisei v'oiker v'oiker. So let's see the pasuk and see. Here is the description of the mon in the Torah. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem tells Moshe, Hineni mamtir lachem. I'm going to rain down for you. Lechem in Hashamayim, bread from heaven. V'yatza ha'am, and the people should go out. V'loktu dvar yoim b'yoimai, and they'll collect, they'll gather every day what's needed for that day. Liman anasenu, this man will be to test hayelech b'sayrasim life, the Jewish people can follow my instructions. V'haya b'yoim hashishi, and on the 6th day, on Friday, v'hechino es asher yaviu, they should prepare. They should be preparing when they bring the stuff in. V'haya mishneh al asher yilketu yom yom, and there will be a double portion, more or double than what they usually gather. And Moshe and Aaron instruct the Jewish people on the matter, and they tell them that there's going to be man. And Moshe says, everyone should gather a measure of an omer for each person. And they did so. And everyone had exactly enough. And on the 6th day, on Friday, they gathered a double portion. And that's what happened. That's the story. So from here, Rav Chisda says, from the wording, the way it describes that they should prepare that to what they brought it sounds like it indicates that there was a certain zrizut. They rushed into the business. V'chino es asher yaviu. I wouldn't have necessarily read it like that, but that's how Rav Chisda reads into it. Sounds like they rushed into it. Okay. Now let's take a look at a very important teaching. Rav Abba taught on this matter. On Shabbos, Chayiv Adam livtsoya al shtei kikarot. A person makes hamoitzi, breaks bread on 2 loaves. Tichsiv lechem mishnah, as it states that there was a double portion. So possibly, likely in the course of Shabbos experience and Shabbos observance, we've been asked, why did Jews make the motzi on 2 loaves of bread? What's it all about? Maybe we've answered, or maybe we didn't answer. But if you're wondering what the source of this idea is, well, it starts in the Gemara, in the description of, or based on the description of the man. The Gemara is going to continue. I'm just taking a look to see if there's any. All right, we'll take a look in the halacha once we read the next few lines about breaking bread. Rav Ashi taught, interesting, because we're going to continue to read teachings in the Gemara that inform and influence the style of breaking bread. Rav Ashi taught, Rav Kana. I saw Rav Kana. The nakat tarti, he would hold or have on his table 2 loaves of bread. Uvatza chada, but he only broke, he only cut, he only served 1. He explained, Omar, look to ksiv. It says you should collect, you should take 2. It doesn't say you got to eat 2. Rashi, nakat tarti, oichson biyadai. He would hold 2 loaves of bread, explaining lok to ksiv, or the mashma achiza. The word loktu means to collect, to gather, to hold. Aval b'tzia like ksiv mishnah. When it comes to the actual eating, it doesn't say that you got to have 2 loaves of bread. Let's read a little more. Rabbi Zera, Havabotza, Akula Sherusei. Rabbi Zera would cut off a piece of bread, a slice of bread that was large enough. Akula Sherusei. Let's read Rashi. Perusa Gedaila, a big slice. It was the amount that he'll need for an entire meal. V'lechvod Shabbat, and this was to honor Shabbos. V'nira kimechaviv suda Shabbos, and it was to show how dear Shabbos was, the meal of Shabbos was to him. V'schazek v'lechol harbe, and therefore he's going to eat a lot. And so he's going to give a visual demonstration. Usually the polite thing is to take a small slice, but here he takes a big slice to show that he wants to honor Shabbos. Amalei Ravina Ravashi. Ravina asked Ravashi when he heard from Ravashi that Rabbi Zera would take a massive slice of bread. And he says this is inconsistent with proper rabbinic etiquette, which is that you should eat in a dignified, respectful, moderated way. The appearance here is that you're just ravenous and you're grabbing and shoving food into your mouth. That's disrespectful. Amarle. So Ravashi responds to Ravina, you're right. But Kivan de Kol Yoimala Aved, being that all days of the week you did not behave in this manner, and it's only on Shabbos that he acts in this manner. Lo michse kiravasanusa. He doesn't look like a gluttonous, ravenous person. He looks like someone who's trying to make a point about how excited he is about the Shabbos. Rabbi Asi, ki mikla lahu rifta de ruva. When they came, when the bread of the Eruv would be in their house, sharu alave, or sharube, they would make a bracha on this bread. Amri hoyel vis aved b'chad mitzvah lis aved be mitzvah. It would appear to me that every Shabbos in those days, if you had a chutzner in a courtyard and they needed to make an eruv, and they wanted to combine all of their, there was again a symbolic collection of food or bread that would represent all the members of the chutzner, and there was a bracha to be made on it. So it seems like they would make hamoitzi on that bread because it already had one mitzvah made with it. It seems like they would every week make a new eruv, although today that's not the way it was done, I don't think. Yeah. In those days, every Shabbos, one person would represent the chutzner or would hold on to it, and they would prefer to make hamoitzi. Today, in Erev Chatzeros, we use matzah, and it's kept all year long, so you would not be eating it. But in those days, it was different. Okay, interesting. The Rashba here has a different interpretation. He says, Rashi says you cut a big slice, but that's not the problem. And he says that actually he would take a slice of every loaf of bread. And that would look like a very impolite thing to do. And he was doing it to make a point to show his zeal for the mitzvah. So here's what I understand. We're going to take a look. I think tomorrow we can start with the Shulchan Aruch now, but I believe this Gemara is the source for an interesting, perhaps idiosyncratic method that people break bread. People make hamoitzi. You might notice they cut off a small piece and they leave a big piece. But what I think they're actually doing, we'll see this in the Shulchan Aruch, is the opposite. They are what they're doing symbolically or metaphorically is they're cutting a big slice to represent the way Rav Zera would make that large slice. So it's not that they're cutting off a small slice, they're cutting for themselves, I believe, a big slice. I believe that is so I believe that's why that is the tradition. Let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch briefly. A person makes hamoitzi on two loaves. He holds both, and then he breaks, he cuts the bottom one. The Rama adds, V'dafka b'leil Shabbos. This is only on Shabbos night that we cut the lower loaf. Aval b'yoyim Shabbos, or b'leil Yom Tov. Other times, boitzim aleh yoyna. We actually break the upper bread, the atam hu aderech hakabbalah, and this is based on Kabbalistic reasons.
What are those reasons?
So you want to learn a little Kabbalah? Hang on one second, I'll tell you this. First of all, just to back up. Leil Shabbos, Hatachtoina, that is a Kabbalistic reason. The reason to be Boitzei on El Yoina, if I'm not mistaken, is a different reason. There's a saying and there's an important halachic principle. Ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. You don't abandon, you don't walk past one mitzvah to reach for another, because then you're essentially discarding the first mitzvah. For that reason, a person should structure to have their talis on top of their tefillin, so that when they're davening, they put on the talis first and on the tefillin. You're not setting your tefillin aside to
That's
put on your
also why
talis.
we cover. That's also why we cover the chalas on Erev Shabbos when we make.
Yeah. Similar idea. But on Leil Shabbos, there's a Kabbalistic reason that originates, or at least it's sourced in the Shalah. I'm sorry, not the Shalah. The Levush, that they would dafka cut the upper bread. We'll do a little research. We'll find the reason if we can find something. But actually, being that on Friday night you're supposed to cut the lower loaf of bread, there are those who are careful that when they structure the two loaves of bread together, they'll put the under loaf a little closer to themselves, so that even though they're taking the lower loaf of bread, it's also the loaf that's closer, and so there isn't this sense of mavirin ala mitzvahs. Let's probe a little bit. Let's see if anybody fills us into the Kabbalistic reasoning of breaking the lower loaf of bread. Bear with me a second. Let's see if the Gra tells us something. No. Oh, here, let's take a look. What I just told you outside. The Bach says you should always break the upper loaf of bread. The Taz says, Ani Nahakti, this is my minig, and the Balatanya, the Shulchan Aruch Rav quotes this too. I leave the lower loaf of bread a little closer to me. And in this manner, I always encounter the lower but closer loaf first. First, hold it up. When you make the bracha, put it on the bottom, and then you make the bracha. So either way, there are two different eitzas, two different tricks, how to manage to both break the lower loaf of bread, but it shouldn't be that you're abandoning or what's the word? So, passing over the other loaf of bread. So that didn't give us the Kabbalistic reasoning, but it gave us a little more of an insight into the technique of how people should break bread.
Would it have anything to do with the sfirot?
With what?
With the sfirot?
Possibly. I just don't know. I'm doing research now, or I'm scanning through it to see if anybody gives us a fast clue. I am left in the dark for them. Well, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, see if he says anything. Then we're going to have to call it a day. Oh, here. No. Okay, this is a different teaching, but we'll close out with this anyways. And then Bli Neder, doctor, I'm going to look around, see who gives us the reason of the Kabbalah. Although if you notice, the Ramah is not keen to provide it, but that's because his work is halacha work. The Rashal and the Shalah both nagu lachtich shneim. Their minhag was to cut both. This is again the word of the Mishnah Berurah. Kipirish Rashba, following the words of the Rashba, which I showed you. The Rashba says that Rabbi Zera would cut all the loaves of bread, and so if you want to follow the Rashba's pshat, you should cut both loaves of bread. Dr. Stamler, you're familiar with such a minhag to cut both loaves of bread on Shabbos night? No.
No.
But
the shla before said he cuts the bottom one first, I think. Didn't he say that before?
That wasn't the Shalah. No. That was the Taz.
The Taz and
I don't remember now. Maybe it was. So
wait a minute, the Gra would take 3?
there are those that would have 3 loaves of bread. Yes.
I never saw that either.
Me neither. But I don't know if this is the Gra.
But I thought it was the chalas, 2 chalas because
No. I'm sorry. Here, some people would have 6 loaves of bread.
I see.
3 large,
they would
3
use a big
small,
one and a small one.
and every meal they'd have a big and a small.
Oh, I see. And then they would use the big one would be either on top or the bottom, depending on Erev
Something like that,
Shabbos
yes.
or Shabbos itself. Mhm.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it here. I hope we'll find someone that will fill us in on the
Rabbi.
Kabbalistic reasoning.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I want to go back for a second to the animals in the pit. Was there ever any remark about the obvious thing that the animal might be injured and then you couldn't shecht it anyway?
That's an interesting question. From this context, it's evident that the animal wasn't injured. But if the animal was injured, that is an interesting question. And again, this is not the place where we have the full discussion. The professor wisely asked, and I remember the discussion, but it's not before us now, about muksa and animals and which kind of animals are muksa, if they're in your care, if they're not your care, if they're domesticated or they're outside. But certainly a person is obligated to provide the basic subsistence to their animals. The question here is more handling them. In a case where the handling is not for the animal. It reminds me in closing, I just read again a famous anecdote. The fish is swimming one day and a net catches him and he's all nervous. I'm going to go to my end. When he hears the fisherman exclaim, "Oh, big fish, I'm so happy. My parrots loves fish." And so the fish comes out and says, "Oh, the parrots loves fish. Then it means I'm in good hands." And then the fisherman goes to the agent of the parrots of the, I don't know, you call it the count. And he says, "Oh, I have a fish that I think the parrots is going to love." And the guy says, "Oh, this is exactly the kind of fish the parrots loves." And the fish is not feeling really good. He's going to go to someone that really loves him. And then the agent who's delivering the fish comes and meets the wife of the count, the parrots, says, "I found this fish." Says, "Wow, he's going to really, really, really love this fish." And the fish is now so blissful and happy. And then the fish is rolled into the kitchen and the chef pulls out a massive knife. And the final thoughts the fish mutters is, "This guy doesn't love the fish. He loves himself." So anyway, do you love fish? So my point is, handling an animal, are you handling the animal to care for the animal? Well, when you're going to shech the animal, or that's what you're doing with the animal, you don't love the animal. One loves themselves. Anyways, I have to go now to let Rabbi Shalmer teach the Chumash, but that is...
Thanks.
Have a wonderful day. I hope to see everyone tomorrow. Gesundheit and Freiligkeit. Yashikayach again.